As of February 10, 2026, President Donald Trump's approval rating has hit a record low of 41%. But you might be surprised to hear that the main driver of that has changed quite drastically over time. Back in the second half of 2025, the country was on fire over the Epstein documents. In July, 40% of Republicans were furious about how the government was holding back files. But now, in early 2026, we're seeing some signs that Republicans have now moved on. So, what happened? Where did the outrage go? As a systems neuroscientist, I see this as a brain's memory systems at work. There's been a public outrage from both left and right. It's gotten so bad that even Republican Marjorie Taylor Greene, who used to be one of the most loyal Trump defenders, has cut ties, demanding total transparency.
When action is actually taken to release these files, and the American people won't tolerate any other bullshit.
But now, dissatisfaction over the files has dropped from 40% to 21%. The thing is, the government has only released 1% of the document, 1% by their own account, over the 2 million documents that they still have. But Republicans have now moved on. So what exactly happened? This month, a new paper in Current Biology changed how we understand forgetting. For a long time, scientists thought, is forgetting about deleting memories, or is it a new form of relearning? Traditionally, we thought there are two different ways to stop a learned behavior. Either you forget,
That's the fork I knew.
and this happens via dopamine mechanisms, or you'd get distracted by a new piece of information, which is called interference. And this study suggests that it's the latter. Researchers studied fruit flies trained to associate a specific smell with a sugar reward. Usually, the fly will smell the scent and rush for the sugar. This is a classic Pavlovian response. A dog hears a bell, it salivates. But when the researchers gave the flies sugar again, but this time without the smell, the flies now stopped responding to the smell. This wasn't because flies weren't hungry or not motivated enough, because they still were. It's that they just stopped caring about the signal. And that's exactly what's happening with the Epstein Files. Have people forgotten about the files? No, of course not. Every time a new name gets dropped, the media picks up a new villain to remind us of all the Epstein affiliation. It's just that our ties to the stimulus weakened. We now have a much more painful signal to pay attention to: the economy.
The economic issues are being added on top or as a foundational part of this.
Again, the economy is a big driver of it.
In the fly study, the flies didn't delete the training. Brain imaging showed that the dopamine action and the memory trace were still there. Instead, the researchers suggest that the brain actually used a new mechanism to suppress the memory that exists without erasing it. When the sugar reward happens without the smell, the brain updates its reality and basically is saying, this smell information is no useful to me. And this is called memory devaluation. Your brain realizes a piece of information is no longer a helpful predictor of reality, so it suppresses it. We are reevaluating our old associations in the face of new data. And the same principle goes to apply to mammals and humans. And this might be how we actually eventually treat PTSD and addiction. So now you might be wondering, is it better to release big news all at once or in waves? As always, the answer is it depends. If you want the public to remember, then release it all at once. Maximize the shock factor as much as possible. If you want the public to forget about it quickly, then you've got two options. One is to release it on a major holiday like the Thanksgiving or Christmas, like everyone is not paying attention to news, or you slowly release it in little drips. A 2024 paper in eLife shows that surprise is what makes us remember. The gap between what we expect and what you actually get is called the prediction error. And when the prediction error is small, your brain just updates an old memory. But when it's large enough, your brain just creates a whole new memory for it. And so the old memory previously stored gets safely secured and protected. If you release documents 1% at a time, like they're doing with the Epstein Files, then you're effectively microdosing the public and almost training the public to tolerate the news and stop responding to it. I don't know if the government knows that's how the brain works and that's why doing it. But sure is working because a lot of people have moved on, even though the shocking names are still circulating around social media. Small, subtle changes in our environment are harder to detect. And we know plenty of companies use this psychological tactic to train our behavior. A great example is the Amazon Prime Video. When they first started introducing ads in their video back in 2024, it used to be just 2 to 3 minutes an hour. Now they have doubled it to 4 to 6 minutes an hour. So they've significantly increased the ad time and also increased the entire total watch time for a documentary or a movie, which is why I don't like it. If Amazon is wondering, yes, we have noticed. But if the change over time has been very gradual and slowly enough, then public accepts it and tolerates it more. Doesn't mean that we've forgotten about it. It's just that we are able to tolerate it more because we haven't seen the change so quickly. Well, back to the MAGA story. It's been fascinating to me to see the MAGA eruption over the past few years and this vanishing coalition for the President Trump.
This has been a core belief of theirs for a long time. Jeffrey Epstein, died under mysterious circumstances. That the list, if you will, is going to bring down powerful people and institutions. Largely Democrats, they think.
It's not the Epstein Files or the client list anymore. Now it's the economy. In 2026, we live in a society where the median home is more than $410,000. The average car costs more than 50 grand. And some experts even say that the new poverty line should be set at $140,000. Cha-ching! In neuroscience terms, the economy has become now the aversive stimulus. When you got bills to pay and that's over your head, it's a constant, painful stimulus. And, the feelings of hurt, betrayal, anger, these things that we might have felt over the Epstein Files are now being replaced by the similar feelings that we have about the current economy, our financial situation, which affects directly our livelihood. We don't forget, we just reassess what's more important to us personally at this point. We are choosing to devalue the Epstein story because that story doesn't pay the rent. I wish it did. The political divide has become larger since 2008, as this new report suggests, and the experts say that this left-right separation feels much more intense in the United States because we've got the two pretty equal-sized clusters that are constantly at war with each other. That's interesting because most other countries don't have that sort of even 50-50 split.
Moderates and the general public on your side. Now that may sound like an obvious point, but in fact, both left and right treat it like a grand secret.
But context is everything. The science shows that our brains are incredibly protective over what we've already learned as long as we're in a new or different environment. Take the cue from the flies. Well, if the fly is in its home, the housing file, and happens to get the reward without the smell there, it updates the brain to say, this information is useless, like we saw before. But then if the flies were moved to a different setting, a new environment like the tea maze, or was introduced to a new stimulus like a new scent, then the brain treats it as a separate event and creates a whole new memory for it. And so now the old memory, the old association stays locked and protected. And I think this explains the MAGA bubble of the recent years. When the MAGA movement first started, this must have felt like a breath of fresh air to a lot of people. We've got this new politician that's coming out of the woodwork that wasn't from the stuffy old establishment. He spoke like it is, and he was speaking about these forgotten group of Americans, these hard-working Americans that were really overlooked by the rest of America. Back then, MAGA voters must have felt like, they're finally getting heard. They're finally being part of this new political movement and this new political era. and they were promised a new hope, a better life, and of course, the loyalty of the base locked in. But in 2026, the context has shifted back to their old environment. The reality of home life, which really hasn't changed all that much, and definitely not for the better. Because voters are now processing this in their everyday, familiar context, like their grocery stores, like their homes, like their bank accounts, their brains have decided the old information is no longer a useful predictor of their future. And this presents us with a strange paradox for learning. If you want to keep your current beliefs safe and locked in, stay in the T zone. Stay in a new environment where everything seems new and exciting and shocking, like the media. In those new contexts, your brain won't have to devalue the old associations. It will keep them in a protective bubble. But if you want to update your brain to match what's actually happening around you in reality, then you have to look at your everyday familiar life. This is why 2026 is particularly difficult for the MAGA movement. The high energy of the rallies, the flashing new environment back in the campaign trail is no longer there, and people are back in their homes. And in that familiar space, the brain is finally forced to do the hard work of memory devaluation. It's realizing that the old slogans are not matching the new health insurance premiums. So, am I telling you to stop learning? Well, no, of course not. Exactly the opposite. This study showed that if you introduce the novel stimulus, a new smelly information, while you're in your familiar context, your old memory stays intact. Which means that if you want to understand other people in a different context and still work together productively, we can't just yell at each other over social media or decide to give up on it and just isolate it altogether. That just locks our old memories and old beliefs in place. To actually change, we have to bring new information into our everyday context. So we have to have everyday conversations, everyday boring conversations that are difficult to have with the people that we don't normally talk to, the ones that actually challenge our ideas. We have to do this instead of just responding or reacting to the next shocking news. We have to sit in our own reality, look at the data, and be brave enough to devalue information that is no longer serving us.